I'd love to start with the state of the industry. The energy industry is going through a massive upheaval. The bankruptcies in this industry are rivaling what we saw in the telecom industry in 2002. But Chevron still saw profits that are really at a level you haven't seen in 13 years. You're looking at about 7,000 layoffs, and you cut capital spending by 25%. I'd love to understand from you how this ranks in other booms and busts you've been through.
Well, it's got some similarities to times in the past. I've been with Chevron over 35 years, and oil prices have dropped 50% or more 5 times in my career. So on the one hand, I've seen this before. On the other hand, this is a pretty deep cut that's taking place. And what we're seeing is capital's being withdrawn from the business. Companies have to respond to the low price environment. Think about 60% of your revenue going away on very short notice. So you do need to adapt to it, and that's what we're doing. But we have seen so much activity in our industry, particularly in the United States over the last few years with hydraulic fracturing and all the activity, and now much of that is being slowed down and capital is being withdrawn. So it's a tougher adjustment than at times in the past.
When you look at the bankruptcies, in fact, there are almost 70 bankruptcies so far this year.
I don't think bankruptcies are ever good for the industry, particularly in the service sector. And our industry has always had many small players in it. And that competitive atmosphere is what advances the industry. So all of that is good. But it does require some adjustment for supply and demand to come back into balance and for prices to be restored to a level that's more consistent with what costs are. In our business, you invest a lot of the money up front and then you produce. So variable costs, if you will, are very low. And so once you have that oil on production, it takes natural declines in the reservoirs to balance supply and demand. And that's what we're seeing right now. Unfortunately, because a lot of the smaller companies were highly levered, lots of debt on their balance sheet, there's just no chance to respond. So we're seeing the bankruptcies. But it's never good to see bankruptcies roll through the industry.
How does the current state of the energy industry make you think about how you're going to invest for 15, 20 years down the line?
Well, certainly in the short run, we have to respond, and we're doing that by finishing some of the projects that are under construction, like Gorgon, and not taking on as many new ones so we can balance the book, so to speak. We're really blessed, though, in that we have a lot of short cycle activity that we can do, for example, in the Permian Basin in the United States, in the shales. But our industry is always going to need some of those big capital projects, such as Gorgon. If you think about the shale business, for example, oil from shale is about 5 million barrels a day in a 95 million barrel a day market. And so we're going to need other sources of energy, other sources of gas besides shale. And so the industry will need to take on those longer cycle projects. It's just right now we're all managing cash flow pretty tightly.
Will you talk about how you manage a workforce that goes through these boom and busts? When you lay off 7,000 people, assuming that there is a boom that comes again, as has always been the case in the energy industry, how do you tell millennials this is an industry that you want to go into? And then a second part to that, how do you stop a brain drain?
We have just under 60,000 employees worldwide, so it's a little bit more than a 10% cuts, a little bit more in some areas than in others, and it's always tough to go through those kinds of changes. In fact, for many that have joined the industry, it's new because they haven't seen these types of layoffs before. So it is very difficult. What we try to do is be very careful, and so we do take preferences, for example, in many cases for those that are near retirement. So we try to limit the impact on those employees that we're going to need for many years to come.
Kids who are just getting out of college, who are a few years into their job search, what would make them decide to be in the oil and gas industry?
Those that are attracted to our business really have studied it and understand it and realize that we're an indispensable form of energy that we're going to need for many years to come. When I joined the company 35 years ago, it was right after the first Iran crisis. And I was interested in macroeconomics, I was interested in geopolitics. Others are interested for geophysics or engineering. So you have to have something that interests you about this business. So the first thing is you attract them to the business. Then you attract them to the company. And the company is one that's well known for its values and for how people do work. Culture is really defined as how you get work done. When we get a summer intern, for example, we've got a very high chance of them coming back and working for us full time because they like our company as a place to work. Now, industry conditions have been a shock to everyone, but we try to talk to employees and we try to really talk about the long term for the business. Most employees, while it's been traumatic to see these reductions in the workforce, some of their peers around them. Most have come through it quite well.
Bill Gates put out his annual letter and tackled only one subject, which was energy. You and Bill Gates have a similar point of view on one half of the equation, which is you both believe that there needs to be energy for everyone, that cheap energy for everyone will help the world. You have massive differences on how you think that energy should be supplied. He believes that there should be no carbon emissions by the end of the century. That's the only way to save the planet. You believe that fossil fuels are going to be a key component for how we deliver energy for decades to come. What do you think he doesn't get about the delivery of energy?
Oh, I think he's quite thoughtful on energy, and I think we have more similarities than differences in our views. If you look over the next 30 or 40 years, I think our views are very similar. His central point is that people need affordable energy, right. And we agree. And right now, it is fossil fuels that provide most of that affordable energy. And there will be new forms of technology. He talks about an energy breakthrough. He talks about something transformative, and he talks about cycling more dollars into basic research so that that energy miracle, if you will, can take place. We agree with that. And our industry, over a long sweep of time, will be transformed. But he believes in the power of innovation, so do I. What I don't believe in is a command and control economy that is trying to force change on a system where there are competing priorities. Most of America lives paycheck to paycheck. Raising energy prices, I don't think will be good for the average American, and I don't think it will be good for manufacturing and other businesses that we want to keep strong in this country.
Do you think it's the government's role to fund that kind of research?
I think the government can participate. I think we have to be careful. Right now, what we're seeing, most of the money that's going into energy is really going into subsidizing energy that's known. So, for example, electric cars aren't new. Windmills are not new. Solar panels are not new. The market can provide those solutions in proportion to how economic they are. We should be sending the money, or subsidies, if you will, into basic research, early stage research, which the market may not fund.
Do you have the same fears he does about climate change, about what happens if we don't get this energy miracle or find this next breakthrough?
Well, I think there are legitimate concerns about the environment. We've been pretty clear about that for a long time, but I also believe that man is very adaptable, and that we have a long history of being able to adapt, both in terms of the technologies that we're able to provide going forward and in terms of how we adapt to changes in the climate. The reality is our climate is changing, has been changing, and will continue to change, and we're going to have to adapt with it. There are lots of things we can do to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in the short run. I just think we have to do them in a way that's compatible with growing the world economy.
There's so much of talk about millennials and how they work has been this focus on purpose-driven work. I'm curious, at Chevron, what happens if you're a company that is developing fossil fuels and is not a huge part of the green energy movement? How do you convince young people to come to your industry beyond what we had talked about earlier? How do you make sure that millennials say, this is a company I want to be at? If it's not a mission I don't necessarily 100% believe in.
Well, those that are attracted to our business know that we're a noble business. I mean, light, heat, mobility, mechanized agriculture, every aspect of our standard of living is delivered by my industry. Our industry's gotten safer every year. Our industry has gotten much better at reducing emissions. 98% of the emissions in gasoline aren't there from what was there 40 years ago when I was a kid. And so I think they see that opportunity and are attracted to it.
Mary Barra, when she became the CEO of GM, talked about developing a culture where people argued with each other. If you want people to argue back, if you want people to state what's on their mind, how do you make sure that that kind of a culture exists within Chevron?
Well, I try to challenge people, and we too can be too polite at times in our company. But being respectful doesn't mean that you can't challenge people in what they do. So I routinely tell our employees to speak their mind. I tell them a story about when I joined the company where I hemmed and hawed when a senior person asked me a question, and he promptly told me, John, if that's all you have to say, we're paying you way too much. I've told that story before because it was true, and I changed my approach at that point, and I began speaking my mind. And so if you challenge people, if you're straight with them, and if you don't react negatively when they tell you something you don't want to hear, you'd be surprised what you can learn.